No, no, I think it's 9 hours compared to you. It's 10:30 in the evening here.
Wow, it's 9 hours ahead. Well, thank you for
Yeah.
staying up late for this. I appreciate it. What are you doing there? Is there a conference?
Well, yeah, there's a conference. There's a mining conference. It's a rather small one. It's more like for the industry service providers. But they have been inviting me for the last, I think, 6, 7 years. And actually, because of this conference, I started to come to Dubai, and I never really understood the city. And then I think some 5 years ago, I decided to spend a week here to better understand and study the city. And then I became very, very interested because it's like a miracle. I've been here for the first time in, what was it? 91. So that's over 30 years ago, because you might know, I was a photojournalist at that time, and we were sent here during the Gulf War. And then I spent a few weeks in Dubai for a Dutch leading magazine. And it was a very small city then, and what's being done here it really is a miracle how this city has grown from a small fisher village. When I was born in 1962, they didn't even had running water. It was a very small, fishing village,
So there's been a
trading
lot
post.
of
Yeah.
building there, and they've built this basically in the middle of the, desert, right?
Oh yeah, oh yeah, and I started to invest a few years back after COVID. Um, One day I was looking for a graph to see what the real estate prices, what the development has been in the last 2 decades. And then I found this graph. I posted a few times on Twitter, and it showed that real estate prices have been declining in Dubai since actually the Lehman crisis. And when I looked at that chart, it showed three lines. One was for real estate in Hong Kong, one was for real estate in Singapore, and one was for real estate in Dubai. And of course, Singapore and Hong Kong were non-stop rising for the last 10 to 15 years. And here there was a declining, valuation. And when I looked at that chart, it was bottoming out around 21, 22. And that's when I decided to jump in, and I bought a few apartments, and they're up nicely.
Ah, so you own real estate there. Very
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
So you don't have to stay in a hotel, when you visit?
Yes, I do stay in hotels because many people who invest here, they have the real estate as an investment. So, and the properties I bought are being finished now. They're almost ready. And then if you rent them out, you make 8-9% return. Well, that's a wonderful return on real estate.
I see.
Uh, yeah.
Okay, so I want to start with the election in the U.S. So going back to November 5th, 3 weeks ago, if you look at financial markets, whether it's gold or Bitcoin or the stock market in the U.S., the Russell 2000, it seems like that was an inflection point.
Yeah.
A lot of things changed in the subsequent days. We saw gold drop over $200 an ounce. We saw Bitcoin rally from 80 or actually 77 to almost 100,000. Did anything change that day for you in your outlook, or is this a bit of is it a bit overdone, in the near term?
Well, in financial markets, we always say first move is false move. So, for example, I think the US dollar seems to be topping out already. Gold going down, I think, will be a short-term correction. But what's really interesting is what's happening with Bitcoin. And I think the new Trump administration will change so many things, and it will be all different from the first Trump administration. And this could be like almost like a revolution in many topics, many fields. So one example, Of course, you know that because you live in America yourself. But Robert Kennedy Jr., as the Secretary of Health, has stated on Twitter that in January, during his first week in office, all CEOs of the fast food industry are invited to join him in the White House. And he's going to tell them things need to change. And I just posted another graph on Twitter today. 42% of Americans are obese. And this is just one of the topics where you can expect big changes.
Yeah, we definitely have an obesity problem in the U.S. and it's mostly to do with the food. There's,
Sure.
refined sugar in everything. There's sugar, sugar, and sugar tastes good. It's addictive,
Yeah.
and people don't know any better. It's cheap. It tastes good, and it's highly addictive, and it's causing a huge health problem in this country. And it's been going on for 30, 40 years. It's just getting worse and worse and worse.
Yeah.
So going back to gold, gold sold off, and I've heard a few narratives. The dollar strengthened quite a bit. The euro dollar currency pair dropped from 108 to 103. It's now about 105. Dollar strengthened against the Aussie, the loonie, lot of currencies. You said you think the dollar is overbought. Do you think that the move in the dollar was the primary driver in the drop in gold, or you
Yes.
think it was?
Yes.
Yes.
There's a direct correlation. If you look at the graphs, November 6th, day of the election, most analysts expected not an overwhelming victory for Trump. So it was expected that this would be a long fight and a wait who won the elections. When it turned out it was a massive victory, the dollar started to rally and gold came down. They often have this inverse relation. And I think we can agree that the new administration is in favor of a weaker dollar because that might help them with their economic policies. And we could even get a serious dollar devaluation, which means a gold revaluation in over the next few years. So I've been talking and writing about a monetary reset for quite some time. And the next 4 years will bring quite some changes within the monetary system. That's my opinion. And whether there will be a gold-backed dollar or like Judy Shelton's idea or a gold-backed bond, US bond, I don't know. But expect the Trump administration to do some heavy lifting with the Chinese, and we could see quite some change within the position of the dollar and the position of the dollar in the international monetary system.
You're writing a new book, right? The Big Reset 2?
Well, the working title is the BRICS Reset instead of the Big Reset, the BRICS Reset, because when I wrote the Big Reset in 2013, I wrote on the back cover that around 2020 large changes would be needed, and in the epilogue, I wrote two scenarios that we could have a joint effort by the East and the West to change the monetary system through the IMF. But we could also have a confrontation scenario where the East and the West would confront each other. And now we're on that course. I call myself a BRICS watcher, so I follow closely what's happening within this BRICS alliance. And I think we could end up into a scenario where the West keeps trading in US dollars within the current monetary system, while the East, the BRICS countries, are starting to build their own trading system, financial system. And already most of the bilateral trade of China with other countries is done in non-dollar currencies, while this used to be mainly in the dollar.
Non-dollar currency. So, I mean, it's a trading block. It's not like they're going to make their own currency, but they're going to have a system of trade
A
and
settlement.
ways to,
Yeah.
settle trade.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I expect them to use the renminbi. So they are not ready yet for common currency. I think that will be very difficult. It might happen over time, but as you know, the US got rich by proposing to use the US dollar during the Bretton Woods conference, because the US understood that they were the only ones who could print the dollar and the whole world would need to use the dollar. And the Chinese understand this very well. And because the Chinese have some problems of their own in their economy, they understand when they can use their currency for trading within the BRICS system, they can print renminbi and use that to buy oil in Saudi Arabia, copper in Argentina and Chile, and all other stuff in some of the other countries in the BRICS alliance. And the BRICS alliance is growing quite rapidly, and already 140 countries worldwide don't follow the Western sanctions. Most of these countries have China as their main trading partner. So China is using its influence in large parts of the world. All of the countries in Middle America, Latin America, Africa, Middle East are not following the Western sanctions on Russia, so are more or less in China's camp already.
Very interesting. So, one of the big uncertainties, I believe, as we head to January 20th, and the inauguration of Donald Trump for his second term as president of the United States is tariffs. And Trump, it's no secret, he loves tariffs. It's the best word in the English language. He said stuff like
Mhm.
that, very silly comments. He has this guy, Lighthizer, who's like his tariff guy and his bulldog. And he's got quite a few people in his cabinet who seem to be very much in favor of threatening the Euro area, China, Canada, Mexico, with tariffs. So let's focus on China for a second. So if Trump follows through on his promises and puts 10 to 25% tariffs on China, how does that affect China? And how will that, what kind of a response are we going to get from the Chinese government? Is it, does that mean they're going to do some really extraordinarily large, stimuluses in China? Are they going to be using their, reserves to buy, the yuan against foreign currencies to try to prop it up? Or do they just stockpile more gold?
I think Trump will be bullying countries like China by imposing or proposing these huge tariffs. But I think it's a technique to start negotiations. So if China accepts a lower valuation for the US dollar, he might bring the tariffs down from 20% or 25% to 10%. So we will see a lot of these negotiations, these bilateral talks, and so this is like a new technique that Trump will use to get these countries to move into the direction he's most interested in.
What do you think about his Treasury pick? Have you read about this guy?
Yeah,
You know at all?
yeah. A former Soros guy. Um, Fortunately, it's a guy who understands financial markets, who understands. I think it's very important for the US to have a Treasury Secretary who understands the business and who is accepted by Wall Street. Otherwise, the US could really lose trust in financial markets. So this is like a guy who's acceptable for the Wall Street banks, but it's also a guy who is willing to work with the Trump administration and to explore new routes. And he is also known to be in favor of Bitcoin. And what I find intriguing is that this whole new administration, the main economic players within this administration are pro-Bitcoin guys. And we all know Trump visited the Bitcoin Nashville conference in where he proposed, so during his campaign, to start with a national Bitcoin reserve, to build a national Bitcoin reserve. Michael Saylor, the CEO of MicroStrategy, has given a wonderful presentation, about 1 hour long presentation. He was asked by Cantor Fitzgerald, and you might remember that the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald was also mentioned as a possible Secretary of the Treasury. Well, it turned out that he was passed for that function and he'll become the Secretary of Commerce. But there are some important guys in the Trump administration who really like this idea that US should build a national Bitcoin reserve of at least 1 million Bitcoin. And that's very intriguing to me, and that also explains why Bitcoin has started this huge run as soon as the election results came in. Um, and and um, and if you know something about game theory, when the US will start building a Bitcoin reserve, other countries might join, and then things will get very, very interesting.
Bitcoin, yeah, it's very interesting what has happened in the last few weeks. I feel like an idiot for not buying Bitcoin on the night of November 5th. That was an easy trade. And so was buying Tesla.
Mm.
Just staring at those charts as the election, results came in, kind of no brainers. Now it's a lot harder because the prices have moved up a lot higher. I think it's good he didn't choose Howard Lutnick. I don't think that Howard, Lutnick
Yeah,
would be the quality to be a Treasury Secretary. Commerce Secretary is a little more appropriate for his caliber. But I agree that he made a good Treasury choice. I think it was a perfect choice. And now we'll have to see if they're able to follow through on some of the election, rhetoric about 3 million more barrels of oil, 3%, deficit to GDP by 2028, yada, 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 3%, real growth. A lot of talk, a
yeah,
lot of promise, a lot of optimism. Color me a bit skeptical on some of the campaign promises and the ability of
sure.
Trump 2.0 to achieve them. I'm interested in the euro area because I hear, although I haven't been to Europe in the last 6 months, I hear a lot of negative headlines, a lot of negative news stories about Germany. Their, industrial base is basically shutting down and partially going dormant. What are your thoughts on the, euro area and some of the currency moves that we've seen in the last, few weeks?
Well, it's getting very serious, and we all know that Trump has this America First strategy. And I tweeted today, it's America first and it's Europe last. And I think Europe could well be collateral damage in the fight between the US and China. Um, we all know that, or many people understand that US is playing this game to divide and conquer, and they want to stay in charge, and when they can use Europe, they will use Europe, but when it's better for the US to make sure Europe doesn't buy its energy from Russia, they will work hard to make that happen. And I think blowing up Nord Stream 2, of course, wasn't done by Putin. It's his energy infrastructure. And Biden has had made clear in the last few years that he would make sure that Nord Stream 2 would not happen. And it's in the US interest that we buy our natural gas from the US, which is actually happening now. And the cost of energy have risen quite a bit in Europe, and this is really killing large parts of the European and especially the German industry. And then you have this problem with the car industry. In Germany, over 10 million people depend on the car industry, and there's this double whammy because they have the high energy costs and they have this competition coming from China. So there are huge problems in Europe, and then we have the problem with immigration. So I speak to a lot of high net worth people in Europe and in the Netherlands, and many of them own businesses, and their first question in these talks are always, Willem, which country do we need to move to? And people are really getting quite negative and depressed on the future of Europe.
So it's easy to be negative. It's easy to be depressed about Europe. It's easy to look at the chart of the euro against various currencies and see a downtrend. Yeah, it seems to be a consensus to be bearish on the
Yeah.
euro. Is there a contrarian view here? Is there some light possibly at the end of this tunnel?
Well, we could have peace in Ukraine. Even Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, said a few days after the election results came in, now we can have a peaceful solution quickly under President Trump. And this was so telling. So this clearly shows that even Zelensky understands that a US administration under Biden or Harris would prolong the war with Russia as long as possible, because that has always been the plan, to weaken Russia by prolonging the war. And even Zelensky understands Trump is looking for a quick peaceful solution, and that of course might help to bring something positive to Europe. But that's one of the few things I can envision.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think we all want peace. I'm not sure who would want more war, although there's probably some people out there that do. I think peace
Well,
would be fantastic.
people make a lot of money, profit from wars. We have this huge military industrial complex, which have started so many wars. I did a study when I was writing The Big Reset, and since the independence of the US, I think there were only 17 years, 7 years, in which the US wasn't involved in one way or the other in a military conflict. So it's like
And
a
what about
business
Europe?
model.
What about France and England and
Well,
Spain and all the wars that they fought in the
uh,
1400s, 1500s, 1600s?
nobody can beat these statistics coming from the US, and the military industrial complex is very powerful. And there's another academic study that the US has been responsible for 20 to 30 million deaths by the wars they started or helped start, or the regime change they initiated since the Second World War.
Hmm. Yeah, I know
Mm.
your views on the U.S. In the military-industrial complex. So we'll just
Yeah,
leave that
let's
there.
leave that.
So,
Mm.
is there hope for the euro currency, this currency union that is a very awkward union of some wealthy countries with higher economic growth and some much poorer countries with no economic growth or maybe
Yeah.
even recession? Like, why is Portugal in an economic bloc with Germany? Is this about to come to an end finally?
No, I don't think so. Not in the near term. Too much political capital has been invested in this euro project. When the dollar will be trending lower because the US wants a devaluation of the dollar to help them with their national debts and to help their economy, the euro will recover. China doesn't want to see an end to the euro. Imagine we have to go back to all our independent currencies in Europe. That would be a nightmare for a country like China. And all fiat currencies have this common problem of the debasement of the value of the currencies. And more people are starting to do what we have been doing with our funds for the last 15 years, is to start investing and start fleeing to all the government can't print, being mainly commodities in our case, but also real estate, like real estate in Dubai I'm buying, or Bitcoin, which they can't print. And this trend, which started after the the start of the Great Financial Crisis in 2008, is really going into higher gear now. And we speak so many people now who follow our model. My personal model for my portfolio of investments, so my private portfolio, is 25% in real estate, 25% in equities, 25% in physical gold and silver, and 25% in Bitcoin or cash, and no bonds in that portfolio. And more people are starting to follow that line of thinking. So that's a sign.
Mhm. All right, so let's switch to the resource sector and the mining sector, which is an area where both of us focus.
Yeah,
And your fund, which is over $100 million in assets under management, the last I checked, is highly focused on the junior mining sector. I want to ask you more broadly before we talk about a few different companies that you might be interested in. The sector as a whole, if we use the venture composite in Canada as a very imperfect proxy for the sector, but in some ways it might be the best we have.
yeah,
It put in a pretty big bottom back in August. It was a pretty
yeah,
big low that was put in place, and it's made a series of higher lows since then. And knock on wood, it's actually trading up 1% today. Um, Canada's taken a lot of heat in the last couple of years from all sides on some of their government policies, the regulations blocking investment from China. I speak to a lot of CEOs in the sector, as I'm sure you do, And overall, the mood is pretty negative on Canada right now. We just saw a company, actually a couple companies, announce quite publicly that they're leaving Canada and they're
Yeah.
headquartering in Switzerland. What are your thoughts on the junior mining sector and sort of the problem with Canada?
Um, well, let's first look at the technicals. I think the Toronto Stock Exchange Venture Index has been bottoming out for, well, almost 10 years now. The real bottom was January 2016, sorry, 8 years ago. Then we saw a retest of that bottom, and we even made a lower low during the COVID crash, but that was very short-lived. And then we saw a second recovery. So the first recovery was 2016. That recovery only took 7 months, I think. And then we went down again, retested the bottom in 2020. Then we saw a recovery which only took 5 or 6 months. And 2016, 2020 were both very good years for our fund and other resource investors. And then we saw another downturn between 2020 and 24, and now this bottoming pattern is so strong, and we're actually on the verge of a breakout. We see a pattern of higher lows. There's an awful lot of resistance just ahead of us. But once the Toronto Stock Exchange can move up, let's say another 5 to 10%, we'll clear those areas of resistance. And we might well witness the real recovery next year, because gold has already been breaking out into 24 after a 4 years sideways pattern. And then silver had a breakout. The gold producers, GDX, had a breakout. And even the junior gold producers, GDXJ, have seen their breakout. So only thing missing now is the juniors. And we shouldn't forget that there will be such a serious shortages coming in the next decade in many of the metals. If you look at the supply and demand studies for the different metals, there are production deficits as far as the eye can see, especially after 2030. And we need these juniors with the best projects, and that's why we invest most of our money in the top 50 of undeveloped mining projects where we are metal agnostic. So we take the best 5 copper projects, the best 5 nickel projects, the best 5 silver projects. And it has been a very frustrating ride, because 15 years ago we started doing this with our fund. I've been doing this privately for 20 years. But in the last 15 years, the last top in the commodity cycle was 2008 when we started our fund. And the Toronto Stock Exchange Venture Index is down still more than 75% since the start of our fund. So it has been a very difficult ride. But I'm quite sure we're witnessing the very first phase of a very long and strong bull market, because of the fundamental supply and demand situation for all these metals.
Yeah, so that's a very interesting topic, because right now we're seeing copper, supply forecasts are going to fall short in 2025 by about 500,000, metric tons, 500,000 tons, a very large shortfall. Meanwhile, the copper price is pretty stagnant at 410. Zinc is in deficit. It's in a pretty large deficit currently. And what is it, 125 or 130 a pound? It's not a very high price for zinc. It's not an incentive price to certainly build a new zinc mine. That's for damn sure. Whereas with gold is 2640. It was just a 2800. that's, in many currencies it's at an all-time high. I mean, even the dollar, it's very close to an all-time high. Yet the junior mining valuations, it doesn't matter if it's copper, zinc, or gold, it doesn't matter what metals the companies have, unless they have a new discovery that's just absolutely gangbusters and incredible, nobody really cares. What is going to
Well,
be?
we care.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, we care.
Yeah.
But what's it gonna? Because I feel like we just trade money back and forth to each other. In the sector, there's like 1,000
Yeah.
people who just buy and sell to each other all day long. There's no real new blood coming in the sector. What's it going to take to get some generalist investors in here and get some new blood into the junior mining industry?
Oh, that's not so difficult to envision, because we all know financial markets run in cycles, and when everybody is in love with tech and valuations in tech, I was just looking at the latest quarterly results of NVDA. You're not paying 30 times earnings, you're paying 30 times revenue. This is as insane as the valuation was of Yahoo and Amazon in 2000. And actually, I reported about that insane valuation in 2001 and 2002 because I was a market commentator for Dutch TV at that time, so I remember it very well. And only 3 years later, the Nasdaq was down 80%. And I think Amazon was down 90%. So markets turn, and when the correction in tech will start, or when the correction in major economy will start, there will be more eyes to value investing, and we could start to talk about a few individual names, but I can give you so many examples of the incredible low valuation in the resource space. And I don't see myself as a speculator, while there are many speculators in the resource space who buy a company because they hope they will do the next big discovery. We stopped doing that a few years back. We only invest in companies who are working on a world-class discovery. So there's always value in the ground where the current valuation is based on. And the valuations are rock bottom. So the downside risk is another 10, 20, 30%, but the upside is 100, 200, 300, or even 500%. There's so many examples I can give where companies can go up 10x without making any new discoveries, just on valuations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are quite a few examples out there, but with the cost of capital being high and companies having to raise capital to advance projects in a lackluster financing environment, the sector remains very challenged. And while I agree that I think we bottomed in August, it's unclear what's going to light the match and set this on fire. I talk to a lot of CEOs. They say we need, new discoveries. We need more discoveries. We need more discoveries. Great, but how do you do it? You need money to drill and make the discoveries, right?
But look at
Speaking of,
look at the best companies out there with the best projects. The Sitkas, the Hercules, they don't have any problem finding money. If you invest in exploration companies who have problem getting funding, you're not in the right companies. Forget about them. There are over 1,000 listed exploration companies in Canada. And sorry if I'm being too direct, but 90% of those, they should die. It's just lifestyle company. It's just promotional Vancouver schemes.
yeah, I mean I'm not sure 90%, but maybe half.
Maybe 95. Yeah. No,
All right,
really.
well,
Look,
okay, let's talk about some good ones.
no, sorry,
But you
but
mentioned two. You mentioned, Hercules. and Sitka. So tell us about those two, because those are two good ones.
Yeah, both of them don't have any problem to get funding. Sitka has over $15 million in the bank. They just informed the market today that they will start an extra 30,000 meters of drilling. They made several interesting discoveries in the Yukon. We've been in this company when they were trading sub 10 million market cap. They're just over 100 million now. If we look at a similar company, who've been responsible for an important gold discovery, Snowline Gold, they're valued around 1 billion. They have been valued as around 1 billion. So you see the 10x there. Um, when all things are said and done, maybe Sitka was able to find even more gold than Snowline Gold. I do like Snowline Gold. We have a position. So it's so the valuation is still so low. There's still so much upside. And then if we look at Hercules Metals, which used to be named Hercules Silver, we are involved with that discovery since the start, or since the publication of the discovery hole, October last year. I've been doing this for 20 years, and this was the only situation where Barrick Gold, a major producer, came in within 1 month after the discovery hole. Barrick Gold invested $25 million, and I think they made sure that the company can come back whenever they like for more funding. There are at least 4 majors, being Barrick, Rio Tinto, South 32, and Idaho Electric, who are all very, very interested in this new copper trend in Idaho. Idaho had never seen a major copper discovery ever. And now all these majors are quite sure that there's a major copper trend. We own 5% of Hercules. We own 7% of Scout Discoveries, which is still private and owns part of the project. It's already sure that this is a massive system. It's complicated, and that's why it takes time to find the best parts of the system. But look at the staking Barrick has done. Look at the staking Rio Tinto has done around this discovery by Hercules. It's already known and confirmed that there's a copper porphyry on Scout's land position a few kilometers east. And if you look at the footprint, the geophysical footprint of this system, it is as large as the largest porphyry systems known to exist in the North Americas.
Yeah, if you look at Barrick and what's happening with them in Africa this year, it makes sense why why
Yeah.
they went to Idaho in such a big way. I calculated, okay, this is my math. I didn't get this from anybody. They've spent $50 million in Idaho in 1 year, in total, in terms of their investment in Big.V and in terms of their boots on the ground. And they opened an office, and they've done a lot of stuff in the local area there. They did a lot of helicopter staking. They staked over 100,000 acres of this porphyry belt in western Idaho. It's not cheap to do that. So they're committed.
I have
And
a great example, Robert. I was invited at a dinner in Colorado Springs at the Denver Gold Show, where the Barrick CEO Mark Bristow would be hosting a few analysts, and I was invited to sit in that dinner. And when he gave his dinner speech about, all the projects in Africa, Pakistan, and everything, when he was finally ready, he was ready to take some questions. And then I asked him what he knew about the latest developments of Hercules Metals. And then he told me very specific details of a permit to drill in the forest area, where the Forest Service of the US is responsible for handing out the permit. So he was up to speed to the smallest details of Hercules metals, and that was so telling.
Yeah, they're very aware of what's going on, and they have a team just focused on this one porphyry belt in Idaho. And actually, the town hall that happened last month, you saw some people who are part of that team that they have there who are solely focused on this area of Idaho. So
They
that's pretty
sent
exciting.
they sent 5 of their geologists to that small town hall meeting, including the vice president of exploration for North America from Barrick. You don't send 5 of your senior guys to a town hall meeting if you're not very, very serious about that project.
Exactly. So, what do you think about this year of drilling in Idaho? What they've been
Frustrating.
reporting so far? Frustrating. Yeah. Um, so the news that Hercules put out on November 19th, holes 10, 11, 12, 13. Hole 12 was the highlight, 338 meters of 0.5% copper equivalent, but showing a clear vector towards Grade Creek, which is interesting because when the season started back in April, May, the focus was on Belmont and Grade Creek. And it seems like that's still the focus as we wrap up the year and head into 2025.
Yeah, well, you follow these drill results hole by hole more in detail than we do, because we know this is a large system. We want to understand that Hercules is on the right track, and they have shown, although they missed a lot of holes and they had some bad luck in their drilling program, they've shown there's this high grade zone, supergene or hypogene or whatever, copper, high grade copper, which is already 1 by 1.5 mile wide. This confirms this is a major discovery. Then they find all the other stuff. Then there's this silver deposit on top of the copper deposit, which reminds me of the wonderful Tier 1 copper discovery by Filo Mining in Argentina, which was just bought by Lundin and BHP. So all these indicators prove that this is a massive system. And because it is such a massive system, it's like being in a canyon if you compare the size. And if you have such a large system, you have copper zones, you have silver zones, you have even base metal zones. And that's so intriguing. And that's why the majors are on top of this. And they're not in a hurry. Barrick is not in a hurry. They will give Chris Paul, who's the CEO of Hercules, money for years to drill out this complicated situation, and they will only buy out Hercules. You know, I don't have to tell you, but a major prefers to take out a company like Hercules 3 years later when they have to pay 1 billion or 1.5 or 2 billion, because they want it to be de-risked enough first. And that's why there's an arbitrage where we, as the smart speculators and investors, can enter, because we have seen enough indications to know this is a serious discovery. We've had 86 buyouts in our portfolio since our inception, because majors wait a few years before they feel confident enough to take out a junior with a major discovery. And during the years a major is waiting for this confirmation, we can make money as investors.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I mean, yeah, so there's a gap, let's say
Yes.
the current valuation is 100 million, and let's say the potential future valuation, if the deposit, if the ore body proves scale and grade over a wide area, if it's proved with drilling, then, we know what other porphyry deposits have transacted at previously. We know that Rio
Yeah.
Tinto and BHP have spent $2 billion at Resolution in Arizona over the last 20 years to advance a deposit that may not actually get over the hurdle and get final federal permit approval. So we know the prize can be very, very big here, but it has to be proven, and that takes time and money. And so that's sort of where there is this arbitrage gap, but definitely a high degree of risk.
But
I want to ask you.
sorry, but if Hercules would auction the project as is now, I'm quite sure the mid-tier copper producers will gladly pay 300-500 million already if it would be auctioned off. But of course, that would be unwise. Let's keep drilling. And my minimum target for Hercules is 1 billion. But this could easily go up, like we've seen with Philo and some other discoveries. This could easily be valued at 2, 3, 4 billion in a few years.
With regard to Scal, which is the little brother essentially
Yeah,
of Hercules, is private right now, but it may go public in 2025. It's not
yeah.
clear as far as I understand, but it's a possibility for sure. But I know they're going to drill as soon as they get the Forest Service permits at Cuddy Mountain. They're going to drill next summer. I mean, that's the plan. 10,000 meters is the plan. What are your thoughts on Scout, and what are you hearing in terms of, the go public?
Well, as said, we own 7% of Scout. As soon as we came in Hercules, I asked Chris Paul, the CEO, is there any company which has some interesting land in the neighborhood? And then he told me about Scout. We contacted them the same day and made a deal within a week. And the great thing about Scout is that they know they have a Potassic center, a porphyry center, because it has been drilled in the past. And as you know, because you follow the story in detail, it's a tilted system, almost flatline system, and where the system reaches Scout's land position, it's outcropping. So the Potassic zone, which is the most interesting zone, is outcropping, and it has been drilled in the past. But as happens so often, a few, a few, well, initial scout holes, which are only 100 meters deep, aren't uh, aren't important enough to 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 do a larger drill program. But now we know this is a large system. Now these former drill holes and these previous results are one piece of the puzzle, and now things are getting very, very interesting. And I know several majors are talking with Scout to see if they can become a partner.
Yeah, what's very interesting about the Cuddy Mountain project is that basically where Hercules is, the elevation is, let's say, 1,200 meters, 1,300 meters. Up by the Great Creek area, it might be 1,600, 1,700 meters. But Cuddy Mountain is actually a mountain, so the top of that mountain is over 2,000 meters. I mean, maybe, might be 2,500 actually. But there's a potassic zone that outcrops there, basically at the
Yeah,
top of the mountain, and it was drilled by Bear Creek in the '60s. But they don't have the drill core. They don't. They just have pieces of data that indicate whatever 40 meters of 1.2% or what have you. Bear Creek drilled some pretty decent holes, but they didn't go deep. They were just doing scout drilling,
eh,
and in the 1960s, 30 meters of 1% was not interesting to them.
no, but it's highly interesting now.
Yeah.
And I think they will do very well, because they know where to drill, they know where to start, and that's much easier than the situation Hercules was in, because Hercules didn't have a clue where the potassic zones were located to. They have some vectors now, but still Hercules is well, looking for the most and the best mineralized zones, and that it might take another 1 or 2 or even 3 years to find them.
Yeah, I think there's been tremendous amount of learning this year, and they know so much more than they did a year ago. At this date. So I'm very optimistic, as I know you are. So final question for you, and then we'll wrap up. I really appreciate you doing this late at night in the Middle East. It's tax law silly season in the junior
Yeah.
mining sector. So this is the time of year where there's just selling for no good reason. Just people just want to book a loss to lower their tax bill. What is your take on this year's version of tax law season in the junior mining sector? Are we past the worst of it? Is the worst still to come? Are you a buyer here in this market environment the last couple of weeks?
Yes, we are. A great example was Aya Silver, which almost halved over a very short period of time. I think a fund exited. So I don't know if it was tactical selling, but we're buying. We're growing our position in Aya Silver. I think we've seen the worst. The worst is behind us in tax-loss selling, but as you know, it can't run up until Christmas. But I think there will be a very strong recovery in the last week of December. And on average, I just did the study again and looked what the returns were after tax-loss selling. So let's say from Christmas to March 1st the next year. On average, the returns are 17-18%. And you have a few good years where the returns are 30-40-50% over a few months. And since our markets are so depressed and have been depressed for such a long time, I expect the recovery after Christmas, so let's say till PDAC, to be at least 20% and probably more. So this has always been a very successful and reliable strategy.
It is. It's, in my opinion, these next couple of weeks are the best time to be putting money to work in
Yeah,
this sector. But don't forget to follow the companies you buy.
yeah.
It's not buy and hold forever. Thank you so much, Vim. I appreciate this conversation. I think it was fantastic. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and this will be up on my YouTube, Goldfinger Capital, tomorrow. And happy Thanksgiving to all Americans. Cheers.
Bye there.
Thank
Thanks.